How many arm isolation exercises do you need to build muscle as fast as humanly possible in your biceps and triceps? Bodybuilders like Arnold Schwarzenegger famously did 2 or more, yet bodybuilders like Mike Mentzer and Arthur Jones often did 0. So who's right? A new study put it to the test. The researchers had a group of lifters train one of their arms with just one biceps curl and pushdowns. The other group did 2 different variations of arm isolation exercises out of a group of 3. Specifically for biceps, they did dumbbell curls, preacher curls, and incline curls. For triceps, they did skull crushers, French presses, and kickbacks. I would note that technically they said they were doing barbell biceps curls, but I highly doubt that they were doing barbell biceps curls with one arm. Also, it's a little bit odd that the control group did one exercise, pushdowns, and then pushdowns were not included in the list of the 3 different exercises that the variety group was doing. Anyway, the study is still a comparison of just doing one biceps and triceps isolation exercise versus rotating through a set of 3 different ones and doing 2 different ones every week. So more variety versus less variety. And importantly, to keep the programs realistic, the subjects also did barbell bench presses and pull-downs, so they had one compound exercise and at least one isolation exercise. After 8 weeks, muscle growth was around 3% in both of the groups, suggesting that the added arm training variety did not boost muscle growth. However, it's worth noting that beyond the typical limitation of an 8-week study, the lifters only had 6 weeks of training experience. So when we look at more advanced lifters over the longer term, and also probably doing higher volumes, because the fractional training volume was only 8 sets per week, if we count the compound volume as half, then it's possible that higher volumes and more exercise variety become more beneficial. Speaking of training volume, there was also a group in the study that increased their training volume on the arm isolation exercises from 4 to 6 sets per session. There was also a group that did both. They added volume and they added exercise variety. None of those groups grew significantly more than the control group that just did one exercise for 4 sets. All exercises, I would note, were performed to failure. So far, these findings seem to strongly support the more minimalist type training from Mike Mentzer and Arthur Jones. However, a huge caveat that the researchers themselves made explicit is that when you increase training volume from 8 to 12 fractional sets per week per muscle group, as this study did, then we would expect only 0.9% additional muscle growth based on the latest meta-analysis of the literature, Ballant et al. And this was actually below the error margin of the DEXA scans. So this study had no chance of detecting a small possible benefit. In fact, it had no chance of detecting the likely small benefit that this additional training volume should have caused. This is especially true in this study where they were using 1-minute rest intervals and going to failure. If you're using 1-minute rest intervals and training to failure and you're already doing 4 sets, then set 5 and 6 logically add very little volume and you cannot expect them to contribute a lot of additional muscle growth. If I had been involved in the research design, I would have personally skipped the 6-week introduction training and just ran a 14-week study and only look at volume or exercise variety. I think what the researchers currently did is a bit of an overreach. Nevertheless, both of the findings do fit with the overall literature. As I said, the extra growth expected from going from 8 to 12 sets per week per muscle group would not have been detectable in this study, and it's not a massive effect, especially again when you're already doing 4 sets to failure with 1-minute rest intervals. Extending your volume beyond that for the same exercise has very little additional effect on muscle growth. Moreover, when we specifically look at arm training and exercise variety, multiple studies have found that adding arm exercise variety beyond one compound and one isolation exercise really doesn't add much at all. Even when you don't control for volume, multiple studies have found that adding an arm isolation exercise to a compound exercise adds minimal extra gains. However, in my PT course, we've done an in-house meta-analysis of this literature, and we found that when you don't control for volume at least, there is additional muscle growth in the groups doing added arm isolation exercises compared to just doing compound exercises. So, what conclusions can we draw from this and other research? Well, first of all, it's clear that your compound exercises definitely count towards your training volume. There is debate in bodybuilding circles whether you should be counting your compound and multi-joint exercises towards your arm training. Yes, you absolutely should. The question is more if it's even needed to do arm isolation training to begin with. Compound exercises absolutely count, and ideally, you count their fractional training volume. In my PT course, we have an overview of how much every exercise trains every muscle group based on the best available research. Ideally, you count your volume like that. For simplicity though, what you can also do is you just count compound exercises in their entirety, or you count them half. Many studies use this method, and it's also reasonably accurate. As to how much exercise variety you need for your arms, the best research does lean in the direction of needing at least one good arm isolation exercise, in large part also because compound exercises simply do not allow you to maximize muscle tension over the entire muscle length of the triceps and the biceps, especially for the triceps where it's hard to achieve that in the long head with compound exercises. So I do recommend that you get at least one arm isolation exercise for both the triceps and the triceps. However, any benefits of further exercise variety appear to be absolutely minimal. So the answer to how many exercises you need is basically the same as the answer to how many romantic partners you need. You just need one good one and then get really good at that one until you get injured and you have to switch. You need one for the biceps and the triceps, not just one in total. So maybe it's not the best analogy, but anyway. Take-home message number 3 is that when you're already doing 4 sets for an exercise, going to 5 or 6 sets for that exercise, especially if you're training to or very close to failure, does not give you much additional muscle growth. This is also clearly in line with most research. You are much better at that point of doing an additional exercise or moving that volume at least to a different day. The extra volume you get when you're already in such a fatigued state is minimal, so you get very little additional muscle growth. If you want to see how optimized program design like this looks in practice, you can get a free trial to my app with the link below or the link in the screen. You can also learn my full training and nutrition methods in my online PT course. And if you just want to watch more free evidence-based content, you can click here to keep watching.